participant be respectful of each other's time and varied perspectives of every other participant. Since it's a remote conference, we will provide some guidance for remote participation. First, please mute yourselves if you're not presenting or speaking, and please use the raise hand feature of WebEx. Alternatively, you can either send a chat to Ashley or raise your hand on the screen, like so, of course, as long as we can see, which I think we can. Also, after you are finished speaking, please lower your hands using the lower hand feature in WebEx. With this conference, since this conference is open to the public, in the interest of time and to ensure the Commission's questions are adequately answered, the Commission will be directing questions to the docketed parties. Let's begin this discussion of the draft with the discussion of the draft tariff, followed by a discussion of the draft interconnection agreement, facilitated by Chris Villarreal from Plugged In Strategies.
Hi, Andrew, can you now hear me?
We can hear you, or at least I can hear you.
Sorry, my computer decided to crash out on me right now, so I'm just on my phone. So I'm going to try to work my way through through my technology problems right now. See if I can figure out how to get this done now. I apologize, I can't get anything to load on my screen, so we just might have to bear with me here for a minute. Again, my apologies. So I'm Chris Villarreal. I am a consultant to the Commission. Some of you may remember me from the first meeting I believe we had on this docket, probably over a year ago now. And as Dave pointed out at the beginning, we want to really thank everyone for their participation and their comments in this docket. The edits that I'm hopefully going to be able to see on my screen and walk through with y'all are our attempt to identify some topics for further discussion, but also to provide provide some perspective on where this docket and where the topics of greater discussion are needed to go forward. And nothing is working for me right now. So, Andrew, if you just give me 1 second here, I'm going to have to do this analog, and you have to help me walk through these things here.
Sure.
The first topic we had for our conversation today, and looking at the tariff, which again, all the edits were distributed earlier, so you should have them all in front of you, is, I believe, the definition of customer.
So actually, sorry, Chris, it's the interconnection agreement for customer.
Oh, interconnection agreement. Okay, so as we were going through this, a high level question we had for the parties to provide some greater clarity on is there is an interconnection agreement for the hybrid microgrid, but there isn't one for the customer microgrid. And to get the conversation going, the question we have is there a need, or is there supposed to be a specific interconnection agreement for the customer microgrid? And that's how we want to, that's our first topic for today. So I guess I would ask specifically to HECO, what is the perspective of HECO on whether there is or is not supposed to be a interconnection agreement for a customer microgrid?
Hey, Chris, Dave, Andrew, thanks for the opportunity. This is Ken Aramaki from Hawaiian Electric. So for this question, so just to make sure, so we didn't create a new interconnection agreement for customer microgrids. The thinking was that customer microgrids are primarily going to go through existing programs or tariffs that are already, depending on what level the generating facility is. There would be different programs that they would apply for, and then within those, there are already existing interconnection agreements for their generating facilities. So we didn't think it was needed to create another layer for this microgrid tariff.
Okay. Any of the other parties or attendees have any feedback or comments on that? Okay. So,
this is Baird Brown. I put up my hand signal, but I guess I don't.
I can't see that. I can't see it yet, Baird. So go ahead.
So, I just have a question to the company, which is microgrids are likely to have multiple generating resources and possibly also storage. And it would be our hope anyway that that would be treated as a single controllable resource. And for purposes of the company system, it would be treated in terms of what its net export is, and not its not the collected nameplate capacities of the individual resources. So there are some things in the agreement that's proposed for hybrid microgrids that suggest that that's not necessarily how you're seeing it. And I guess I would just raise it as a question as to how you see that working.
Thanks, Baird. Just so I understand the question correctly, this is a situation where it's a customer microgrid with multiple generating resources, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, for those would, well, so first of all, those larger facilities, what I call larger are, I think greater than, gosh, I can't even remember what the thresholds are, greater than 50 kW. So, those types of facilities would go through our standard interconnection agreement, which I think with those agreements, you could probably do multiple generating facilities under one agreement as a customer cited non-export facility.
Thanks.
And Baird, I just wanted to mention just at this point that we do want to discuss the question of the capacity of the microgrid and sort of how do we define the rated power and that sort of thing. And that's going to be one of the topics later for discussion. And I guess since I unmuted myself, I guess I'm just the other way that we're thinking about this is just, are the interconnection agreements or is the interconnection process for customer microgrids sufficiently streamlined to meet the intent of Act 200, or is there some value in having some sort of interconnection agreement that's specific to customer microgrids that would help to meet the intent of the act? And I mean, we just wanted to confirm, what the perspectives of the parties, to that question before diving into the rest of the tariff.
So, Dave, so from Hawaiian Electric's, from Hawaiian Electric's perspective, we have those existing agreements. I think that what we thought we were doing was trying to streamline these efforts by, using the agreements that we already have in place to allow for these types of customer microgrids. the thinking that we would create a new agreement to serve as a purpose for a customer microgrid, I think like would not help to may not help to streamline, because I mean microgrids are in effect more complicated or more complex than the existing tariffs or programs that we already have, and so we tried to just modify what we had to create, to allow those types of things to happen.
Okay, thanks. Ken.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Could I also add something, Dave?
Yeah, please go ahead, Marcy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think there was a lot of discussion on this. I think there was some concern if we didn't point to the interconnection agreements that are already in place, that it may cause some confusion, because right now, I guess those systems or those programs kind of are like microgrids. So not to avoid some confusion of creating some I guess having parallel agreements in different places. So that's why I kind of pointed there, because there was a thought where you should let those customers kind of move ahead, and they could potentially participate as microgrids, right, under this tariff, but still utilize that program. I think we'd have to go back and give some thought, I think, about your question about whether there is a specific type of customer microgrid that I guess we would have to look at streamlining, or looking at the agreement itself, whether there could be one for this particular tariff, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. Yeah, I don't think the intent is to duplicate, or the desire would be to duplicate it all. It's just recognizing there are multiple different DER programs, and perhaps different interconnection agreements applicable there, depending on the program. And so anyway, we just wanted to, noting that there was an interconnection agreement for the hybrids, but not for the customer, just kind of circling back there. I think, as we'll talk about later today, I think there's a desire to make sure that the customer microgrid, the pathway for those is set up and ready to go, and the tariff is ready to go. And so, if the working group is comfortable that the other interconnection agreements are in good shape for this purpose, then I think that's the question, or that's what the feedback that the commission is looking for just on this topic.
For the customer microgrids, if I remember correctly, I think we're only asking the customers to notify us through the application for whatever program their generating facility would fall under, to notify us that they intend to operate as a microgrid.
Okay, so the sense that I get from the attendees here is that there's purposely not a section in here for customer microgrid, because existing processes already handle it, and Mark, you just said the application process will probably provide you enough information as well about the size and the other attributes that you'd want to know about the microgrid. Is that an adequate summary? Okay. So hearing nothing, let's go ahead and go to the next topic, Andrew.
We're on the definition of the customer.
Okay. There we go. It takes a while to get to Minnesota. So I'm very aspirational in my shirt today. So the next question we had as we were looking through the tariff is the definition of the customer. So we have two topics that we want to address here in this section. And the first one is a question we had for MRC. MRC, if I recall correctly, you had proposed some edits to the definition of the customer that I guess more specifically referenced the microgrid operator could be considered as a customer. So the first question we have for MRC is what was your rationale for making that edit to expand the definition of customer? And the second question we have is how would the proposed change from MRC work if multiple customers were associated with the same utility account? So let's first start with at least Baird about the proposed edit you had for the definition of a customer.
I don't think we have strong feelings about whether the definition is changed as such. I think our strong feeling, and I think it can be solved elsewhere in the tariff, is that a third-party operator could serve as the customer for purposes of the microgrid. But I don't think we need to change the definition to accomplish that.
Okay. Which I guess gets to the second question we had, which goes to tariff section E1A. In the question that we had for folks to comment on, which I think builds on your point there, Baird, is what happens if the customer has a third-party contract with a microgrid operator, who then acts as the agent on the customer's behalf? And then would this arrangement be similar to a typical customer DER installer relationship? Do folks have questions on that section or on that topic? Because again, I think again to Dave's point, one of the things we're trying to figure out here is, there are some differences in terms between the customer microgrid and the hybrid microgrid, and as it applies to the customer microgrid, we have this potential, as Baird just noted, where it's a third party who's acting on behalf of the customer microgrid. So where and how does that arrangement get reflected in the customer microgrid discussion?
Well, to sort of back up a little bit to put it in perspective, I guess our view is that first off, a microgrid may indeed have sub-metered customers, or it may just for the workings of the federal tax law necessarily not have an owner or lessee who is the original customer, because for investment tax credits, if you have a government or a nonprofit that is not a taxpayer, you can't lease the system to them. And if you want an owner that can take advantage of the tax credits and reduce the price of the system that way, the only way to do it is with a power purchase arrangement rather than with a lease. So there may be lots of reasons why the owner and or operator of the system may be different than the people who are consuming power. And the people who are consuming power may or may not then be direct customers of the utility. And we actually originally proposed the notion of participant to deal with the fact that there could be customers of a microgrid who were not customers of the company. But that definition has been repurposed. So I don't know whether it needs disambiguation here, but the thought is that there would be one point of financial and operational responsibility for the customer microgrid, which might be, one of the people receiving power, might be somebody who operates on their behalf, might be, and the microgrid could designate.
Any responses back on that to Baird's point?
Hi, Chris.
I have,
Go
ahead.
No, please.
I have a comment on that. The suggestion by MRC to change that customer definition appears to assume that the microgrid operator is the same entity as necessarily as the customer. However, could there be situations where the microgrid operator is different than the customer of a customer microgrid?
We don't assume that they're the same at all. That's really our point, is that they may be different. But it may be that the person who is operating and has direct responsibility to the company is not the principal user of power.
This is Paul DiMartini. Chris, I think as Baird's pointing out, you can and probably will have two different entities involved. The approach that is being taken in California at the moment in the draft community microgrid tariff is to have create a definition around the microgrid operator in that role, not unlike in the California context. And I think it goes to what you mentioned, is a DER aggregator. So that allows that kind of role that Baird's describing to have a definition and a kind of a structure around it that then is distinct from the customer. Now you can have the operator be the customer in some cases, obviously, but where it's not, then you have a clear definition of what that role is. And I'm not familiar enough with the Hawaii rules to know whether there's a similar rule like exists in California for the definition of a DER aggregator as it is in California.
Right. Hey, Andrew, could you bring up the tariff section E1A? Is that possible?
It's up.
Okay. So the reason for this question is in the E1A section of the proposed tariff, it says very clearly, for a customer microgrid, the microgrid operator is a company customer. And I think the question we have here is, as I think we've gotten through in this conversation, is that may not always be true. And so I guess the comment back is, does this section need to be revised to reflect the possibility of a microgrid operator that's not a customer?
Well, I guess there's sort of a chicken and egg here. If what you mean is, I mean, suppose to make this more concrete, there's a hospital. The hospital hires a third party to come and operate, build and operate a microgrid for them. And the hospital is probably a big financially responsible entity. It may sign up to be the nominal operator and customer, and the fact that there's a third party who's acting as its agent is sort of a contractual relationship that's totally independent of the relationship with the company. On the other hand, it could, and the Princeton Medical Facility, no relationship to the university, in Princeton, New Jersey, has a microgrid in which a third party, NRG, built the microgrid and operates it for the hospital and actually for several other customers located in the same complex. And that third party is the one that is the customer. And it provides power to the hospital and others through their own contractual arrangements. So all we're saying is that there should be one point of responsibility to the company, and that agency, person, whatever it is, in turn can resell or provide power to other participants, let me call them, within the microgrid.
Okay, so Baird, would the change, where would you recommend making that clarification? Would it be here in E1, or would it be clearer back up in the definition section, either adding a new definition or modifying an existing definition?
No, let's clarify it here, and let's leave the definition of customer unchanged so that we don't mess with the whole rest of the tariff universe.
Chris, this is Paul DiMartini. I think there's two pieces to this. One is who is accountable for the operation under the provisions for as the microgrid operator, and in relation to potentially a different entity than the customer that Baird's been talking about, and then what's here in E1A has to do with if the microgrid operator as the aggregator is participating in a program, how would they be compensated for those services? And there needed to be a mechanism by which, and what this is referring to is that they would become effectively a customer because they'd have an account to be paid. So otherwise they wouldn't have a mechanism to get paid. So that's where this is that's probably where this confusion's coming in.
Well, there's a second possibility here, and that is that there's more than one customer of the customer microgrid, more than one participant in a customer microgrid. And that can happen either because it's a landlord-tenant situation or just because under Hawaii law, if you have 3 or 4 a small handful of people that are served under long-term contracts, and the microgrid isn't holding itself out as serving the public, it wouldn't be treated as a public utility. And so what we're saying is you want to have one entity who buys and sells power to and from the grid, and what happens to other folks behind the point of common coupling is really not relevant. It's that one point of financial and operational responsibility, whoever the microgrid decides that is the one that has the relationship with the company.
Right.
So let me ask a clarifying question here. So I guess is the question here, should the compensation go to the customer or the microgrid operator? If the financial arrangement is with the customer who has leased or given responsibility to operate the microgrid to a third party, it seems to me the sticking point here is the microgrid operator language. Would it be simpler for this section to delete the references to the microgrid operator?
Well, I think then the point is that a third-party operator can be the customer for purposes of the microgrid. That's the main point that we're trying to make. Doesn't have to be, but it may be.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just for clarity, that our interconnection applications already have sections for the company customer, the owner of the generating facility, if it's different than the company customer, and also the operator of the generating facility, if it's different from the owner. So that's how we handle third-party leases for any DER system. So I'm not sure that it would be too much different in this case. Maybe there needs to be some clarification on how the term microgrid operator is being used here. But generally, right, the bill credit goes to the company customer through the meter, and then in some cases there could be a third-party contractual relationship between the third party and the company customer.
But I guess what we're trying to say is that the person who's using most of the electrical power may not be a company customer anymore. There may be no contractual direct relationship between the person or persons who are using the power and the company. It would only be with whoever is designated as the operators, the single point of contact for the microgrid.
Yeah, hi, this is Craig. If I might just add in here. Currently, that ability is currently in the tariff. So let me give you the example. And I think, Baird used a hospital, but let's take a shopping center. And a shopping center is the customer of Hawaiian Electric, but it's the tenants who use the power. And it's already built into the current interconnection agreements. And so under this scenario, the microgrid operator would be the shopping center, the owners of the shopping center or the operator. And as you know, shopping centers have management companies and other contractual relationships. So I think what's concerned is already taken care of in the current tariffs and agreements. And Mark, you can confirm.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's right, Craig. So maybe it's just clarifying this one section here to differentiate between the different entities. But customer microgrids are, consist of, among other things, generating facilities behind the meter. So the company doesn't necessarily have a relationship to anyone that may be sub-metered. So it doesn't, there's no sort of impact to us.
Yes, exactly. And we're just trying to clarify that could be an independent third party for purposes of the microgrid, the one that actually has the customer relationship with the company.
Okay, and then Baird, what I just heard is that is covered in the otherwise applicable interconnection agreements.
Well, thanks, Craig. That's helpful. I'll certainly look at that. I heard a lot of confusion in the discussion before that sort of assumed that the customer was sort of the person who was originally taking power, and that may not be the case. And so, I thought it was helpful to clarify that. I don't know whether we've got it clarified or not.
I have a quick input. If the customer definition includes microgrid operators. Well, my question is, I know there's a hybrid microgrid, microgrid capacity cap allocation, 1 megawatt for Maui, 1 megawatt for Hawaii, and 6 megawatts. I'm sorry. Well, there's a capacity allocation anyway. And is there a capacity allocation for customer microgrids, or are they subject to the caps under existing DER programs?
Yeah, the program caps in the tariff were intended to cover the hybrid microgrids, not the customer microgrids.
So am I correct in saying that if there's a 100 kilowatt cap for existing DER customers, then for any customer microgrid, their application cannot exceed 100 kilowatts?
No, they can apply under the SIA program. There's no cap for the SIA.
Can you repeat that? Part of it got blurred.
So the SIA program has no cap. So that's always an option for any customer microgrid to submit an SIA.
Gina, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't have any additional questions in this section. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts before I move on to the next topic?
By the way, this is Jerry Sumida. One thing to note about this section deals with billing and compensation. It does not, in my mind, necessarily solve the definitional problem of customer. But in this case, we're talking about billing and compensation. Okay, so who is going to be on the other side of the utility for billing and compensation purposes? It could be the microgrid operator, or as Baird has indicated, it could be a third party. So I think this section still needs to be clarified somewhat, because again, you're not talking about total accountability for operational and other purposes, but you're talking about billing and compensation. And that may or may not be the customer, depending upon how the microgrid is set up. And quite frankly, everything behind the microgrid really is to be worked out by the microgrid participants, including people who take energy, generate energy, and the microgrid operator, as well as who may nominally own something for, as Baird points out, tax purposes. So again, I think this still needs to be worked on, but remember, this is for billing and compensation purposes as opposed to total accountability purposes. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
Chris, this is Paul. That's why I was pointing out that there wouldn't otherwise be any standing for the operator to if it wasn't a customer on some dimension being able to participate in a program. So some recognition that the operator could be an aggregator under a program because this is referring to blue sky or grid connected mode, to Jerry's point. So it might be good to come back to this at some point.
Yep. Okay. Let's move on. Andrew, let's go back to the slides, please. Okay, so the next topic we have, then it loads on my screen, is another question we had for MRC. So in Tariff Section B3, MRC proposed to add additional language regarding the applicability of other tariffs. And Andrew, if we can now go back to the tariff. We had some questions, or I had a question about the, just wondering if it could be rephrased in a way to make it clear, because we as we were reviewing it, we didn't quite understand what this section was getting at, this addition, and it's the section highlighted here in gray, I guess. And it says, in addition, any company rule which requires that generating facilities be owned by a customer or located on customer premises to be eligible shall be deemed to include all generating facilities that are behind the point of common coupling of a customer microgrid and under the operating control of the microgrid operator. So, Barrett, if you wouldn't mind giving us an explanation of what this language is to provide.
Sure. This is kind of the other shoe on the discussion we just had. There are a lot of rules that the company has that for compensating various people, programs that it has, that oftentimes are only for the owner of the generation, or in some cases for the owner or lessee of the generation. But as I was trying to indicate before, there are lots of reasons why the person who is the financially responsible person who's making the operating decisions may not be either of those. And this was an attempt, however, I'm happy to have it be clarified, to make it clear that to make the first sentence operable, you have to give whoever is operating a microgrid the same status, whether they are, whether they're the owner or the lessee or not.
Okay. Any comments back to Barrett on the addition of this sentence, and or suggestions on clarifying or simplifying the purpose of this addition?
Hey Chris, this is Ken. This, I think in essence, like what Barrett is saying makes sense. But I'd like to ask that we take some of these parts, like such as this, back for discussion with broader company to see if there's any impacts to the other sides, because we're just a subset of individuals on this call, and we need to check with this may impact others. This will impact others. I'd like to get clarification on the I think that's Barrett's addition, that the customer microgrid shall not be subject to Rule 15. Maybe a little bit more context on
that. You mean the Rule 15, the Rule 15 line there?
Yeah. I'm not sure if that was a MRC comment or a...
Yeah, that was also an MRC comment, because Rule 15 as written would prevent the resale of power from the company within the microgrid. So the microgrid, typical microgrid is designed to not be an exporter. It's designed to, function on a day in, day out basis, to be taking a certain amount of power flow from the grid. And you know, if it then, like a landlord tenant, redistributes within within the microgrid, that shouldn't be prevented.
This is Paul DiMartini. I think it's important to clarify the difference between a customer microgrid and a hybrid microgrid. In a customer microgrid, as we've discussed and Barry just described, I think that's right. But it sounds like existing tariffs cover that. To Craig's earlier point, the hybrid, however, is quite a different thing. And the nature of the operation, at least as it's developing in a couple of other places in the country, is different than what Bear just shared. So I think it may be useful to parse these two if there's some clarification about customer microgrid, as Bear was describing, versus hybrid.
I very much agree with that. I think hybrid microgrids, as they've been defined in this tariff, this wouldn't be relevant.
Okay.
Oh,
Um, Go ahead.
sorry. Could I also add, I wanted to, I guess even for my office, we need to take back this language. I think there was some thought, or earlier discussions about, I guess, the definition of public utility. And if a customer microgrid operator is selling within that customer microgrid, there is some relationship issues that we'd have to take a look at between the operator and the customer to see if we would have any issues with this language. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Is there any other comments on either the Rule 15 language here or the longer sentence that's highlighted here?
I mean, I guess I'm not clear on why any of this language is necessary. We don't have any similar language in any other of our interconnection applications, which functionally may be doing the same thing. I think just clarifying the earlier point that we can go back and clarify or distinguish between a microgrid operator versus a customer owner. Typically on the interconnection application, both parties will sign that document.
Okay. Just keep talking about this. Let's go to the next topic. Okay. So the next topic here is on indemnification, and what we did here, or the first question we have, is whether indemnification language should be in the tariff or if it should be left entirely in the agreement. That's our first question. And then the second question is, or should such language be limited to the interconnection agreement along with the limitation of liability section? So the indemnification section has, I believe, two parts to it, which is indemnification and liability. And what staff did is we moved most of that over into the interconnection agreement, but what was left is, I believe, indemnification. And so the question here is if people have an opinion on whether indemnification appropriately belongs in the tariff section or if it should be moved entirely into the interconnection agreement section and therefore removed entirely from the tariff. Are there any opinions?
Hi, this is Craig again with Hawaiian Electric. So the reason it's in the tariff is because we don't control the structure of who's the party signing the interconnection agreement. For instance, you could set up a shell company as a microgrid operator, and that would leave utility without perhaps financial recourse. So, really what you're looking at is saying, especially since this is new and we haven't gone through this, it's to look at this and say, okay, utility has an obligation to serve. There are a lot of different parties out there. There's a lot of different things. We do not have control over the operation of the microgrid. We don't know, for customer microgrid, what's going on behind ECC or hybrid microgrid. There's a lot of different factors. So by moving it just into the interconnection agreement, all you're doing is providing indemnification from a limited parties, and you're opening up the company to liability from other parties. For instance, customers of the hybrid microgrid could sue the operator, who then turns around and asks for indemnification. And what you want to do is broaden it to say, hey, look, there's all these different relationships, but at the end of the day, we have to look at who's responsible for what, and hold those that have control and accountability with the necessary liabilities. And that's why it's more important to go in the tariff, because we just don't know what's happening on the interconnection side.
Yeah, this is Jerry Sumida. While I agree with Craig, I don't think this does it, because this talks about a microgrid operator, not who's in control. And if you take Craig's hypothetical, and you have a shell corporation that is set up for whatever purposes as a microgrid operator, then holding a shell corporation by itself as the indemnifying party really does not get you anywhere near. It seems to me that in a contractual arrangement, meaning the ICA, and I'm not saying that an indemnification should not be in the tariff, but in an ICA, you could define who the indemnified parties are in a much more general, as well as, quite frankly, much more tailored situation to the specific arrangement or transaction that's involved. Whereas in a tariff, you can have some general language, but essentially it's inflexible. So I would leave you with 2 points. One, this provision does not solve Craig's problem. And two, in an ICA, which is going to be tailored to every single different project, each of which will be different, if not unique, you can do that tailoring, which is exactly why you have contracts negotiated by parties. Thanks.
And this is Baird. I don't have strong feelings either way. I certainly think it makes sense in the agreement, but I think the important point is that the company can have financial requirements for somebody who plays this role. Somebody's going to be their customer and provide indemnity, and if they are a shell corporation, that they're going to insist on a guarantor or a letter of credit or something, and will. I think that's utterly appropriate.
I'm not suggesting it doesn't go in the interconnection agreement, but what I am suggesting is it should be in your tariff as a starting point, as any number of requirements are in your tariff that show up in the interconnection agreement.
This is Ken from Hawaiian Electric. I just want to also point out that there's a hybrid microgrid section, and then also the customer microgrids. For customer microgrids, we don't have that standalone interconnection agreement for customer microgrids, but that the tariffs and other rules apply. So just want to make sure that if we do strike this out or in any shape or fashion, we need to make that adjustment to all the other tariffs that have not included this language for the customer microgrids.
Okay, so Ken, if I understood your point, what you're saying, I just want to make sure I understand. The customer microgrid references, so C1 and C3 for indemnification and liability, are not currently included in the other interconnection agreements?
When you phrase it that way, I'm not sure. I'd have to check if they're in the other ones, but I'm thinking they're not. They're certainly not as written. Because we didn't write it as a customer microgrid in the other tariffs.
Okay. Understood. Any other comments here on what potentially, any other comments on whether this should remain in a tariff or whether it's better suited for the interconnection agreement?
Yeah, this is Marcy. I guess I took a quick look. I think in Rule 14H it does have this indemnification or something like this, not for microgrids, but for customers. But I think, and I'd have to take this back, but it seems like this language is in the rules because the rules are the, is what's enforceable by the commission, and what's in the contract, right, is between the customer, the microgrid operator, and the company. Yeah. So I think it would have to be in both, but I'll take that back to my office. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to check before this meeting today. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Marcy. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic here. Sorry, my screen's taking time to load. So the next topic here is we have a data set satisfaction prior to feasibility study. So this refers to tariff section D3B, which we'll bring up here in a second. So as we were reading through this, there was a section. This section describes a number of a list of things, or an expected list of things that the microgrid operator must provide to HECO to meet in order to be eligible for the tariff. And what we were wondering here is whether or not there's an opportunity to craft a documented list of data needs, because one of the main question we had was that if the data that was sent to HECO must meet its satisfaction, then why would HECO need to take an extra step regarding determination of its satisfaction? So would there be an easier step to just come up with a list of necessary data, have that data then be submitted, and that be it? And so we're wondering, is this a problem elsewhere where data has been provided but not to HECO satisfaction, but has been done in a standardized manner? Or can HECO develop a standardized set of data to remove what we kind of review as a bit of uncertainty? So Andrew, if we could bring up this tariff section. Let's see if scribbling on my screen will move things faster. So here in DB, we have this is part of the application process. So B is if the applicant chooses to undertake a feasibility analysis, the applicant shall agree, so on and so forth. Company shall make less efforts to review the analysis. And then here in B, it says a complete set of data needed to conduct the feasibility analysis. And so the question here is, if somebody submits a complete set of data, what we propose to remove here is to the company's satisfaction, because that appears to introduce a bit of uncertainty. So what we were thinking here is, if HECO could, or if it was already intended that there's a quote complete set of data, to identify what that data need is, so that the parties or the applicant, whoever that may be, knows the data needs to be provided, and to take away a bit of that uncertainty between for the applicant. So in other words, if the applicant knows that, as the applicant goes through the application process and they come to this line that says a complete set of data, should there already be a document that identifies what all the data needs are? Because that would indicate then they provided a complete set of data. So I'm wondering if there's any feedback, mostly from HECO here.
Yeah, I think Exhibit A has, which is the information on the microgrid. Exhibit A has some of that data, but there might be additional things we need to know. We need to think about that a little bit more. I guess we that information, I guess, isn't necessarily included in the tariff because we haven't thought all the way through yet what the feasibility study will exactly look like. I think at a high level we describe it there, which is just to give a preliminary assessment on how to create that facilities needed to create the microgrid island, to better inform the developer on how best to set the boundaries of the microgrid. And yeah, not have actually gone through this exercise. It's we still need to kind of work our way through it. So anyway, that's sort of the thinking right now.
Okay. So, I mean, what I think we were trying to capture here is trying to minimize the amount of data disputes that might occur during an application process. So that if HECO could come up with a list, and since this is, I believe, for the hybrid microgrid, in the as the hybrid microgrid seeks to apply, if at some point HECO could develop a list of data that it needs, so that we don't have a hybrid microgrid coming in saying here's data, and then HECO reviewing it and says, well, this isn't the data we need this data. If we can try to figure out a way to just minimize that interaction, that back and forth, to make things a bit more efficient for both sides.
Yeah, we can work towards a complete or a list. I think the issue that we've experienced in the past is, even though we provide a list of a data request list, what comes back isn't always necessarily what is needed to actually run a study. So there's a lot of back and forth with a developer to clarify things. So, starting the clock, as soon as the developer provides what it thinks is complete, really going to cut into the time needed to complete the analysis.
Okay, understood. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts about this question here on what is a complete set of data? I believe we can move on to the next topic. So the next topic that we had some that we want to have some discussion on is in tariff section E2, and this one is regarding the hybrid microgrid compensation. And the two questions that we have for this section is, in regard to the current billing compensation mechanism, what other arrangements could be explored or should be explored? And could a leasing model of HECO assets be accommodated? So let's go back to the tariff. To look at this section again. And here, for this, yeah, so in the section 2, I think we just had this general perspective here that what other mechanisms could be put into place regarding billing and compensation other than what's described here. Sort of as we talked about earlier, there are other participants or other entities that could take some of the roles as described in this section that would impact the compensation written in this section. And then what are some additional models of a hybrid microgrid that could be enabled through this section, such as I said earlier, the leasing of HECO assets?
Chris, this is Paul. I think one of the things to think about, and because this hasn't really come up in this discussion, is that there's kind of a presumption that the microgrid, hybrid microgrid, as a boundary may be defined, that all the customers that are within that boundary would be participants. And as we've seen in parts of the country, that isn't always the case. So how you deal with non-participants seems to be an issue that when you start to think about leasing, because leasing implies that somebody else is going to take responsibility for those assets, and probably not just during emergency times, but in other times as well. And it seems like the roles and responsibilities and the implications for what happens with those non-participants. The other thing that I'm not clear has been fully thought about is the implication for new customers that may want service connections or within a defined hybrid microgrid boundary, or those customers that do not yet have DER but choose to build their own DER but not have it operated by the microgrid operator. What happens to those customers? And it seems to me there's enough complication around those alone, as we've seen in the discussion in California on these topics, that when you start to talk about leasing arrangements, you really start to get really complicated. And I do appreciate that there is one microgrid that has this arrangement, but it's a pretty unique situation. The Hudson Yards microgrid, hybrid microgrid in New York, but that's a pretty unique setup where you're talking about the secondary network for commercial and residential high-rise development, very large complex. You think about Ala Moana, on steroids. So that's a pretty unique thing. Other sort of hybrid microgrids that we might contemplate in Hawaii would be largely involving some, a larger piece of the system, particularly if we're talking about upwards of a 3 megawatt limit per hybrid microgrid. You could be talking about 400 to 500 customers involved. So much more sophisticated, complicated, and a number of issues arising.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts here about how this section, how this section would impact or allow or not allow other type of billing or compensation mechanisms within a hybrid microgrid?
Yeah, this is Baird. I mean, this is something that was discussed briefly in the working group, but early on it sort of got put aside. I think the question is whether there's a way for a hybrid microgrid to operate more like a customer microgrid, in which the microgrid participants get their electricity priced based on what the microgrid operator can deliver. And, so whether, I mean, as it stands, I suspect there will be very few people who attempt a hybrid microgrid as defined here. Because usually what drives a microgrid, in addition to resilience, is that, in fact, the included generation is going to save customers money. And so it's, I'm not saying it's a simple discussion and not disagreeing with some of the complexities that have already been discussed, but it's that would be the possibility, whether it was through leases or whether it was just through an arrangement that allowed some sort of on-bill credit to the included customers for the power that's generated within the microgrid. I mean, there's a lot of ways to accomplish it, and it's worth exploring, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one, which is on the hybrid microgrid application section here. So on the next topic here, this is a kind of a simple question, I hope. As we're going through the edit, as we were reviewing the proposal, we came across this section and just seeking some clarification from Hiko regarding the reference to a queue. So in this section, there's it says that the hybrid microgrid application goes into the queue, and we didn't know what queue this is referring to. So if it's a hybrid microgrid seeking to interconnect, is there going to be a separate microgrid queue, or does this go into the more general interconnection queue for all other resources seeking to interconnect? So we're just seeking clarification on what Hiko means here for queue purposes.
I think the queue here was intended to, I know there are some red lines that struck out the program allocation and the program cap, but the queue was meant to cover relative to the hybrid microgrid allocation for each operating company or service territory. And then also to the extent that there would be multiple operators vying for the same or have overlapping boundaries. Obviously they would need to either adjustments be made, or only one operator can operate a certain electrical boundary.
So this was meant to apply to a hybrid microgrid interconnection process.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Section G covers hybrids.
So, sorry, I'm going to belabor this a bit. So, as the hybrid microgrid applicant seeks to interconnect, it would go through an interconnection process that is bounded by only hybrid microgrids seeking to interconnect. So, if there were two microgrid applications at the same location, or if there are two hybrid microgrids seeking to interconnect, they would flow through their own interconnection queue. They would not be integrated with other resources seeking to interconnect.
I think that's right.
Okay. All right. So that was that question. The next topic, which Mark builds on what you just said, does relate to the program caps, and we'll start first with the program project caps. So what the red line that was sent around earlier from the commission proposes is to to limit the program project caps. So the question that we have here is to HECO, and what was the basis for instituting project and program caps?
So for the project cap, I think we're saying 3 megawatts. That was based on when we had earlier discussed in the working group meetings. Typically, we thought that would be an appropriate size to cover a hybrid microgrid being contemplated here. Typically, our distribution circuits are loaded to around that size megawatt. Keeping in mind there are 2 circuits per transformer for typical distribution designs. So typical substation may carry 6 to 7 megawatts total, and then each feeder, around 3. So roughly, theoretically, if someone wanted to create a microgrid for an entire feeder, 3 megawatts would probably cover it. And the program caps, for the same reasons folks have been pointing out earlier, for hybrid grids, this is something that's pretty new, and other utilities have done similar concepts, but typically those are utility-owned hybrid microgrids, not third-party. And I think it will take some time working through the first couple of these especially on the controls part, the protection and for a microgrid will take a while to work through. So I think there's going to be a lot of adjustments or lessons learned that would need to be incorporated for future development or refinement of the tariffs and the contracts. So that's sort of the intent here to start off taking the walk, jog, run approach to this.
Okay, so I guess one of the questions we had then, building on what you said there, Mark, is for Hawaii and for Maui, the project and program caps were the same. So if you had one megawatt project on either of those two islands, you've also then hit the program cap.
Let me see. Yeah. We can look at that again. I need to go back and think about why we had said it. Well, but I see your point.
And then also related, we had a question, and I think this will come up again. Maybe we can address it now, because also the question was, should opportunities also be available? So if we keep either or both of the cap limits, or even if we do get rid, even if they aren't there, should these opportunities also be extended to operations on Molokai and Lanai? Or what were your thoughts about excluding those other two islands?
I think we would. I don't know that we need to exclude them necessarily. I think we just need to think about that a little bit more. Things are just a little bit more complicated on those islands. I think we just would need to give that a little bit more thought.
Okay. And then the second question we had in relation to this is in tariff section H3A, lowercase a and I or 1. There's a reference to rated power, and we're wondering what is this rated power reference, and how is it measured? And as the question is, how is the rated power calculated for interconnected set of loads, generators, and storage? So if a microgrid includes storage, what is the impact on the rated power methodology if there is something like storage included in the microgrid? In other words, the rated power reference here is undefined, and the question we had is, how is it calculated, and what are the impacts of that definition on some other architectures of a microgrid?
I think we can. Let me see where we. I think in the. Okay, so in exhibit, or in the interconnection application, on exhibit A, there's a section for a generating facility, which lists out all the different generating facilities that would be included in the microgrid. And then there's a total rated capacity. I think that's what we would use. So we can clarify that and reference that section in the interconnection application.
Okay.
So it's exhibit A to the interconnection application, number 7 or section 7.
So perhaps more more specifically, what is, you know, what is rated power supposed to capture?
So in this part of the tariff, let me see. I think this was referring to performance of the microgrid. Yeah, so essentially what we're saying here is that during the transition between grid connected to island mode, we don't want to have any power going across the PCC, just so that it's sort of a no impact. That transition doesn't cause any impacts to the system. So I think as a general matter, you know, the transition of a microgrid between being connected to the grid to island mode is best done when there's no power going across the PCC, so that so that the system doesn't see like a huge drop off in load and generation when that happens.
So is rated power a result of generating facilities total, or the generating facilities minus battery, or minus something else? What is it? Sorry, I don't mean to be obtuse here. We're just
no.
It's an undefined term otherwise.
Okay, the reference, the specific reference here is to when a customer might transition, and all we're saying is we're just defining that concept of transitioning with no going across the point of common coupling plus or minus some margin. So that's all we're trying to say there, instead of just saying it has to be zero. It's, you know, zero plus or minus some amount. We can maybe put a footnote there to better define that. Or a definition, okay. A defined term up top in the tariff.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this one before I move on to the last item? Okay. So the last item, I believe, is, oh yeah. Okay. So again, as we were reading through the tariff, we came across a clause in tariff section H3, paragraph 4. And it's in the anti-islanding section. And I will admit that I don't know what this clause says. Mostly because, I just don't know what it says and what its intentions are. So we think that this clause that we're going to highlight in a second refers to additional sections in Rule 14H. And let's go ahead and pull up the language here. We're hoping that HECO can clarify and perhaps write it more simply what this clause is supposed to say. And so it's right here in this highlighted section here. we added the word "and" because it seemed to fit, just to make the sentence perhaps more legible, or the clause rather. And so we're hoping if Hiko could explain what this highlighted clause is supposed to mean.
So for this part, I'll go back and double check the way, I mean, we essentially were taking the concepts from 1547, 2018, but essentially what all we're saying here is that the transition to island mode is allowed to occur whenever the system would normally be whenever the system is normally supposed to trip offline, whether it be due to ride through or anti-islanding. So in other words, if the generator was going to trip offline, islanding or ride through, then that's when the microgrid would be allowed to transition. So instead of tripping, it can transition to microgrid mode.
Okay. Like I said, to me, it looked like there are commas and other words missing here to make this sentence make more sense to me. Because I think we all read it with that intent, Mark. I just couldn't parse this sentence to get to what you just said.
Okay, maybe we can rewrite that.
Okay. So that was, I think that'd be great, Mark, if you guys could consider that, because it just sounded like a bunch of words running together there. So that's all that we had in our review of the tariff. We're supposed to take a quick break here, but I just wanted to just offer a minute or two. If any folks had any additional comments on stuff we went through in the tariff that we discussed here in the tariff section.
Chris, there is something that we'd like to clarify. I think in the microgrid definition, page 3 or so. Sorry, Andrew, if you can go to the microgrid definition. Oh, we noticed that only during emergency events was struck through. Further down. More down. It's under microgrid. Yeah. Yes, can you guys provide a little context on why that was struck through? You know, being that in the act, that was clearly identified as a reason to be developing this tariff.
Ken, I can try to answer that. I think so. These are proposed red lines, and we're still considering what the final form of the tariff should look like. So there's going to be some further steps after this, just to kind of set the stage here. But I think also the commissioners are thinking about sort of the future of the tariff and the opportunity here. And so in defining the microgrid, we're thinking about what the appropriate definition of the microgrid should be. When the microgrid can operate, or what the sort of parameters are around islanding and that sort of thing, that can be defined in the tariff in other sections, perhaps. So we're still considering it, but the thinking is, longer term, perhaps there may be times when microgrids under this tariff are not simply operating during emergencies only. And so there may be times when, and so for that reason, we may not be appropriate to at the outset define the microgrid in this, restricted in that way.
Okay, thanks. We may want to add more clarifying sections then in the remainder of the tariff, because just a quick look through it. This is only where it was like really clearly put out there that this tariff currently is allowed during or islanding is allowed during emergency events.
Well, this is Baird Brown. The MRC would strongly support the striking of the words, and we can talk in other contexts about sort of what limits there should be, if any. But there could be lots of reasons, including just testing. So.
This is Paul DeMartini. I think it would be important too to distinguish between types of microgrids as well, because as we've been talking about, hybrids are quite a bit more complex, and there's implications for those customers that may not be participants that choose to be non-participants in a hybrid.
Okay, so let's take a quick break. I think we said 10 minutes, but let's try to make it a little shorter unless we see if we can make it a little shorter. Let's say 5 to 7 minutes. And then we'll come back after the break to discuss the interconnection agreement. We'll have a discussion on the interconnection agreement. So let's come back. Try to come back, say, in 5 minutes or so. So that's 3:50 Central, and then we'll kick off then. Okay. Let's go ahead and get back. I hope everyone had a chance to stretch and get perhaps some water or other things. This would be the time if we were meeting in person where the facilitator tells everybody to stand up and stretch their legs. So I hope everyone had that opportunity. So we're going to move forward and talk about the interconnection agreement for hybrid microgrids. But before we go into that, I want to preface this conversation by noting that as I and in discussions with staff are going through several of these documents, we just ended up coming up with a number of questions and comments and concerns about the level of, I guess I'll call it level of detail that didn't necessarily have a sufficient opportunity for discussion in our review of the working group, and in reviewing the comments from the parties as well. So before I do jump in the interconnection agreement, in consistent with what I just said, one thing that you'll note that was not distributed to everybody was a redlined customer checklist. And in fact, if you go through the tariff, I think you'll note that the red lines remove references to checklist. I think that's that document, and as we go through the interconnection agreement, are two examples where we were reviewing it and we had a hard time figuring out ways to make that more more customer friendly, more in any ways that we could identify it that would be more meaningful to the participants and to the hybrid microgrid operators. So for the customer checklist, we ended up just not sending it around because that document needs a lot more work. And as we go through the interconnection agreement, you'll see that we'll say similar things to there as well. So what we ended up doing instead is in the red lines, just removing references to the customer checklist because it needs a lot more work at least as we were reviewing it. And there seemed to be a number of sections that were unclear, the purpose or the role of it. Why did HECO, why was HECO requiring a third party to do a lot of work that would perhaps be better suited just in the negotiations between the operator and the customer? And so that's why you don't see a customer checklist added in here, is because as proposed, there was not just the whole thing needed to be reworked, and so that's why that's missing. And that preface is also there to note something similar as we go through the interconnection agreement, is that a number of sections in here appear to be what we'll call overbroad or in need of simplification. With that said, I first wanted to kick off this conversation with any input that people want to share at this time regarding the interconnection agreement. Yes, I should have waited for this slide, Andrew. Thank you. To be more specific here, the Commission acknowledges that the specific provisions in the agreement were not discussed in the working group. We read that in the comments. Staff participated in the working groups, the public working groups at least. And additionally, the review of the interconnection agreement does not appear to be sufficiently streamlined to meet the intent of Act 200. So in regards to that, and again, similar to the customer checklist, what is suggested here is that the parties continue to collaborate and revise the interconnection agreement. we've made some red lines. We've added some edits, made some comments that should be addressed by the parties in their collaborative sessions and be reflected in the next interconnection agreement, with the intent to have that revised version submitted to the commission for review. So like I said, I first want to start at a very high level in looking at the interconnection agreement and just getting some conversations from folks on how best to address what staff has identified as some need for additional work on the interconnection agreement. What are folks' thoughts on how best to achieve that, and what are some comments that the stakeholders may have that they want to make regarding the interconnection agreement, if any? Let me ask it a different way. Does anybody disagree or have a different opinion from what is here on the slide?
This is, I not only don't disagree, I strongly concur with what you just summarized, and I, for one, would be more than happy to submit detailed comments in aid of the working group effort.
Okay. Any other comments before? I mean, we have some examples if that would be helpful. I don't know if that would be useful. We can go through a few of our examples of what we're talking about to help the parties address some of these questions and issues we have with the interconnection agreement.
Yeah, this is Jerry Samita. One process timing question. Do you have any thoughts as to when the commission would like to see a revised draft submitted to it? Thanks.
I don't have I don't have the answer to that question. I think that's one of the things we want to know more about as we go through this conversation about the interconnection agreement and even the disclosure checklist. Is how long? Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question right now. I think we don't want to have this so we continue to wait much longer, because I know it's been an open proceeding for a time right now. But I think we can just hold off. I think, Jerry, we can give you some additional guidance as we go through this conversation the rest of the day.
Sure, that's fine. I wasn't advocating any specific date, but just wanted to know if there's any thinking on that at this point.
Sure. Okay. Well, I can give you guys just a few examples of what we were thinking about, just to seed the conversation, I guess, a bit, or to seed the thinking going forward. So one of the examples that we have that is in the red line is read on page 1 there, and this goes to the conversation that we had before the break around the program caps. And the interconnection agreement, as written right now, is only for those projects 3 megawatts or less, which was consistent with the tariff filing. But as we think about a project cap size, and as the staff red line noted, perhaps eliminating them, what difference or would there be significant differences, or what would a tariff, an interconnection agreement look like for projects greater than 3 megawatts? What's the feasibility of that? What type of things would go into an interconnection agreement for projects greater than 3 megawatts? That's a topic we talked about, and similarly, how to handle interconnection agreements for Lanai and Molokai, since this particular interconnection agreement is for just Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island. So that's something we thought about. The next big one that we identified, we redlined the term to from instead of a 5-year term to a 10-year term. And that's something that we were thinking about would make it be more consistent going forward, would provide some better opportunities for hybrid microgrids to go out and operate in a better manner. There were a number of, and I'll just add as an add-on to this, there were a number of testing requirements that were throughout the document that, as we read through it, were kind of oddly situated in relation to a 5-year contract. So there were testing requirements for 3 and 5 years, even though it was a 5-year contract. And so, consistent with those, what we were trying to do is make things simpler, or at least try to make things a bit more simpler for the process here. And to make it simpler, we redlined this to have a 10-year length in term, except for other than the 5-year term. We already talked about the customer microgrid discussion earlier, so we don't need to talk about that component of this question. But does anyone have any comments or questions about either what type of interconnection agreement would be needed for a project greater than 3 megawatts, or the potential extension of the term of the contract from 5 to 10, as proposed here in the red line?
Chris, this is Paul DiMartini. Just to clarify, so on the first question about, what happens for those hybrids that may be proposed greater than 3 megawatts, are you looking for the working group to come back with what the recommended approach would be for that? Or are you looking for this interconnection agreement to address that size, those size of hybrid microgrid? Or are those questions that you want the working group to address?
So for example, as the red lines of this document and the tariff note, we redlined the document to remove the project caps. But we think that there may be an appropriate differential between projects 3 megawatts and below versus projects that are 3 megawatts and greater. So to the extent there are anything significantly different that would go into a hybrid microgrid interconnection agreement for projects greater than 3 megawatts, that's what we would like. That's a question that the working group we'd like to see the working group address, as well as the second part of your question there, Paul, which is the process by which a hybrid microgrid project greater than 3 megawatts would what that process would look like for interconnection. So, is there a new interconnection agreement necessary, or is the interconnection agreement roughly the same regardless of project size?
Yeah, and thank you, Chris. I think this also ties to Jerry's question about the time at which to contemplate this, because for context, these discussions in other states, particularly California, that I'm involved in, as Mark described, the HECO system, when you get above 3 megawatts, you're now at a substation level or greater, maybe sub-transmission, and it's quite a different arrangement. That actually there is no precedent in the U.S. for a jointly operated microgrid, what otherwise might be called a mini grid, at that level. So being able to sort of fully explore what may be needed, if there's a if there's a short time constraint, it may be a bit challenging to try and address any other issues while also trying to address that in a relatively short period of time. So just to share that. Okay,
understood.
I mean, I think folks do understand that in the hybrid microgrid, there's of the type we're potentially contemplating here. There's only one other that is in development. It's taken 2 years to get to that point. That's the Redwood Coast Energy Authority's Arcata project that they're collaborating with PG&E, and it's not going to be actually operational until a year from now. So it's taken a long time to work through, and there's a lot of complex issues, and it's not even the type we're talking about where you'd be at the substation and greater level.
Okay.
So I'm not commenting one way or another, but it may be that megawatts is not the relevant measure. I think Paul's exactly right that if you go beyond a substation, you're really going into a different territory, and it may have more to do with the number of customers than the number of megawatts. So just on the other hand, the agreement may not look all that different.
The operating provisions I think would be quite a bit different. But yeah.
Okay. So again, like I said, I mean, there's all that we've done here in the song is highlighted some of the staff areas, while recognizing at a high level the entirety of this document needs some greater effort at simplifying and making it more in alignment with the expectations of Act 200. So those were just what I think are some of the high level, big picture items that need to be addressed, or that there are questions for the working group to go back and consider. If we wanted to go to, let's go, Andrew, to page 7, which is section 13 of the interconnection agreement. Because I want to sort of make sure that we've covered this as much as we can. So what we did in this section is we moved a number. This is again the liability and indemnification section. So what we did is we moved the language from the tariff and put it here. So for the time being, you consider that they're in both places. And I guess I want to make sure that folks are okay. I won't ask the question that I asked earlier about whether there should be one or the other, but let's just focus on the agreement section here. I want to make sure that folks, if you've had the opportunity to review this, that we've covered this appropriately, and that there are no questions about the language that's covered here. So I guess the reverse of the question is, for the language that's here in the agreement, is this the appropriate language that needs to be in the agreement?
Yeah.
for both
Hi,
the liability and indemnification.
This is Craig, if I might add in. I get the idea and the concept. Perhaps this is, some of the lawyering things. Some of it could be perhaps revised a little to make it a little clearer, but perhaps what I would suggest is that we give it to the working group and the attorneys to pound out the language, but I do understand what the concept is. So I think we could probably arrive at something that works.
Something works would be great. Okay. The next question I have, and Andrew, let's go to page, I think it's page 24. This is a relatively straightforward question that I had as I was reading through this. So the highlighted section here says, Microgrid Operator shall provide a telephone line for company-owned meters. And I guess I'll ask two questions here, or a couple questions here. Is this a typical request for projects, for other DER projects? Is this necessary if there's an advanced meter there? What type of telephone line is being specified here? So I was wondering if he could provide a bit more clarity or clarification on the requirement for a telephone line.
Yeah, we'll go back and double check, but I think an advanced meter would avoid the need for the telephone line. The telephone line was the old system for large customers that we used for metering. But we'll go back and double check. But I'm fairly certain that the advanced meter would take care of that.
Okay. Well, that would be great. Then let's go to let's start at page 38, Andrew. So as I was going through this and as staff discussed some more about this, I needed additional clarification here on the ramp rate definition. Because I want to make sure that these documents are clear on the ramp rate definition. So in the tariff, it is specifically referencing I believe it's the soft start ramp rate definition. And in this section here, it just describes the ramp rate. And then if we move ahead, Andrew, to page 44, 44 here as well discusses ramping at a certain rate. And I wanted to make sure that the use of the word ramp rate is the same. And I think as staff reviewed this, there is some differences in these sections between the use of ramp rates. And I guess I'll first ask Hiko, which is it in fact the soft start ramp rate that is being referenced and what should be used, or is it a different ramp rate that is supposed to be used?
I think they are two different things. The soft start ramp rate that's in 14H has to do with when a inverter or generator is reconnecting to the system following a trip or some other disturbance. The ramp rate here.
And Andrew, let's go up to page, I think it's, what, should we go back to page 38, Mark? Would that be easier than what's here?
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to page 38, Andrew.
Yeah, that ramp rate there is typically what we've have as a performance requirement in our for other facilities or in our contracts. And this ramp rate, I believe, is more related to shutting down or coming down during normal operations. So yeah, during the typically what we would specify in our other contracts are like a 2 or 3 megawatt per minute ramp rate. I think to reduce the confusion, we may be able to not refer to the soft start ramp and just use this language here that is typical in our all of our contracts. But we can go back and maybe suggest a revision for this issue.
Okay, because like I said, there's in the tariff, there's a specific reference, I believe it's in tariff, a specific reference to the utilization of the soft start ramp rate as defined in 14H. And that sort of what piqued my curiosity here in this one is the tariff said one thing, but the agreement said another. And
yeah, let me go back and clarify that because I noticed the interconnection agreement doesn't use soft start and they just refer to ramp rate.
Right.
And the section number is H3AI.
Okay.
Yeah, because I went to 14H, there were like 3 ramp rate methodologies, and I wanted to make sure that we were referencing the same one consistently.
Okay, yeah, we'll go back and do that.
Okay.
Chris, this is Paul DeMartini. Could I ask about, since it seemed like we skipped over it, 22B, the strikeout on 22B?
Is that page 22?
No, looks like section or provision 22B. It's page 24 of what I'm looking at.
That section right there?
That's right. Thanks.
Okay. So this gets to the conversation I had at the beginning around the disclosure checklist. As written, the disclosure checklist needs to be rewritten in its entirety, I guess I'll just say, at the risk of being too direct. And that was the gist of the deletion. Now, I guess as I'm reading this, part of this may be able to survive right now, but it really is the focus on the disclosure checklist as not being satisfactory right now and could be used. So that was the point of this.
Okay.
Was just getting at the disclosure checklist.
But the idea of having participant agreements and being able to identify which customers have chosen to participate is that's kind of an important concept here, I think.
Well, I guess one of the, a concern that I could perhaps have here is the level of, there are some things that are best negotiated without HECO needing to dictate the terms between the microgrid operator and the customers, right? So if the microgrid operator wants to come in and negotiate terms and conditions to operate the microgrid, that is the negotiation between the operator and the end-use customer.
Right.
So to the extent an agreement like a participant agreement could be used to interfere or enjoin those negotiations, that would seem to be an infringement in the ability of two entities to negotiate fairly.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent the participant agreement is there to say, here are the consumers and perhaps the meter numbers, so that the utility knows who is inside the microgrid, that would likely be okay. But it's just really focusing on these terms in the document, like the disclosure checklist, that seem to be best left between the microgrid operator and the customers inside the microgrid.
Thank you.
I guess if I could comment there, the way this is set up in the tariff, all the customers remain the customers of the company, and they pay ordinary company rates, whether it's in grid connected mode or island mode. There's no special treatment for the customers except that they get to keep getting electricity in island mode. And so, I mean, there are provisions, for instance, in the statutory protections for tenants when you have a landlord-tenant situation that require a certain amount of disclosure. It's a few lines of text, but the relationship here is not displacing, and this goes for a lot of things throughout this agreement. The microgrid operator is really playing a very limited role here, and has not got much of a direct relationship with the customers.
Baird, I think I think there's kind of a link, there is a link back to the idea that that the microgrid hybrid, we're talking about a hybrid microgrid here, that the hybrid microgrid could be used as a more operational thing in terms of islanding, for times other than emergency, as was, Chris, I think you noted, was something that was being considered in the future. And if that's the case, if this would be used in anything other than emergency, then customers that whether they've participated would need to have. I mean, it would be important that they would understand that those are the terms, and the other is the company would need to know who's decided to participate and who didn't. And as we've seen in California, there have been customers who've said that they didn't want to participate. In fact, California, as some of you may be well aware, is exploring how to actually have customers opt out, to enable that. So this issue is kind of a, how do you account for who's in and who's out? And to the extent that somebody who initially decided to participate ultimately later changes their mind and decides they don't want to participate, how to address that?
I'm deeply involved in the discussions in California as well, so I'm familiar with what's going on. But I think that's for let's leave. I mean, Redwood is a very particular example. The point here is that the customers are getting served by the company throughout, and whether they're in island mode or not in island mode. I can't see a reason why, unlike the customer microgrid, where there might be a reason to choose to island for the economic benefit of the internal customers, there's no benefit here. The economics for the internal customers are just that they're customers of the company at the whole time. So I don't think there's, in practice, any reason why there would be anything but an emergency. I mean, we can discuss who gets to decide when there's an emergency, but other than that, as this is set up in the tariff, there's a very limited thing going on here in which maybe the customers are paying something extra for the benefit of being able to island.
Yeah.
So Paul, one of the things I'll add to this conversation is that the tariff says that the customer of a hybrid microgrid is still charged the same rate that it's otherwise under and pays HECO for power consumed while the hybrid microgrid is in operation.
Right.
And, I think to Baird's point there is HECO recovers costs or is billed for power consumed whether or not the hybrid microgrid is islanded or not. So if it's islanded for some period of time, all the power consumed by that customer is still paid back to HECO at the tariff they're on.
Right. That's not the issue, though. The issue is that you struck in emergency only, so that could then potentially be dispatched at any time for any reason. And then you are customers that might be on that within the boundary of that microgrid may or may not receive the level of service they thought that they might. Or if there's a service charge for that additional reliability that Baird mentioned as a separate side agreement between the operator and that customer, they may choose that they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to pay that premium. They may choose to have their own backup generator and not that, because they may see that as a more cost-effective option, or they may already have one. So you will have these situations where, with respect to the reliability dimension, not the ongoing tariff arrangements, for customers to opt out.
I don't disagree with that, Paul, and I don't think it's worth going into deep detail here. I don't think there's a reason. I mean, while we would like the emergency only to be struck with respect to customer microgrids, I'm not sure it matters with respect to hybrid microgrids. If that's a sticking point from your point of view. So I just, but it's a more general phenomenon. There's sort of a lot of things in this document that are like, oh, well, we'll shut off the microgrid. Well, you're not going to shut off the microgrid. They're all your customers and they're going to continue to be your customers. So what you really have is a bunch of DER, and what's appropriate to a DER. It's not shutting off the microgrid, it's shutting off the DER, for instance. So, I mean, I don't need to go at great length here, but just think this is bigger than what you need for what you are permitting.
It sounds like in concept, some identification of which customers are participating. And maybe as we look at this, some distinction between customer microgrid and a hybrid microgrid with respect to emergency only could help resolve some of these questions.
Okay, and I think, well, I mean, like I said, these edits, these red lines here were proposed because we are looking to the stakeholders here to, make edits to streamline this, to try to address some, I guess I'll say, barriers that we see here in the document to hybrid microgrids, operating. And if at the end of the day the stakeholders come to some agreement, then we'll certainly, look forward to agreements on language revisions. Are there
Sorry,
any
can I
other?
add one thing? Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Marcy.
oh, thanks. I guess I was looking for a good place to discuss the disclosure checklist.
Sure.
I think, yeah, sorry, that actually, a lot of that came from our office. And we'll take a look at it. We hear the comments, and I guess one of the things that we feel is important is that we want to give the customer as much information, that they need before they sign a contract. But we do hear you, so we'll take a look at the disclosure checklist.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, 6 pages seems like a lot of stuff for someone to go through. I'll just, if there's ways to make make it easier for a customer, I think that would be great.
Right, and just wanted to emphasize the purpose. I think what we're trying to do.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's, I don't know where we put it. I think there's a section in here, probably not in here, may have been in the tariff, where we left. There's some language I think was left in the tariff that said some customer notification and education must be made, but we removed the reference to the disclosure checklist simply because that needs some additional work.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments that folks have on either stuff we've discussed so far? As you've read through this, are there any additional questions that y'all have on what we've redlined in this document? Okay, hearing none, I want to thank everybody for your attention, and I'm going to hand it off to Andrew to drive the boat going forward. So Andrew, take it away.
Okay, so thank you, Chris, for the great discussion, for the various edits and comments we had during the draft tariff and the draft interconnection agreements. Let's now discuss how revisions to Rule 24 and other DER tariffs will enable streamlined interconnection and operation of hybrid and customer microgrids in the future. So included within the packet of information we sent out and red lines, we have provided some red lines for the Rule 24 kind of proposed edits to other tariffs, but it only encompasses Rule 24. Notably, we have several questions for the parties. First, how do the parties anticipate the revisions to Rule 24 will be incorporated into other DR programs or tariffs? Second, how will the embedded edits allow for customer microgrids to sign up and operate in relation to Act 200? And third, that more of a request for the parties, but the parties are requested to provide revised versions of all the DR tariffs for the Commission's review, along with any justification or comments related to that. Okay, so that was a lot, but does anyone have any questions before we delve into the proposed red lines that the Commission has submitted in the most recent filing on the 27th, last Friday? Okay, hearing none, bringing up the red lines. The red lines are fairly simple. I'm going to scroll down. Apologize for my screen being white. Okay, so there's only really one page that got edited that other parties also proposed red line changes to. Is the new section called Section F within Rule 24. Again, this was proposed language that would be potentially somewhat slightly modified to go in other tariffs. Namely, the Commission made several edits to some of the capitalization as well as some of the adjectives and pronouns and whatnot in this section. So it's pretty straightforward. Is there any questions regarding these types of edits, or any questions about the requests by the Commission for the parties to review other tariffs?
Sorry, and Andrew, just to clarify, so in your slide, is the Commission saying that other revisions are needed for the other programs to apply that section to?
Yes. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin. Sorry, cut you off.
Because as drafted, I mean, it was meant to be like a copy paste into all the other programs, and we provided a table of where the section would be included in other programs. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yes, we're clear on that, and that was the intent, that all the parties would be able to see all of these embedded edits in every single one of the tariffs to make sure, absolutely sure, that again, we can start immediately operating or signing up and operating customer microgrids, because as stated earlier in this conference, the intent of allowing customer microgrids to sign up, or sorry, not the intent, the process was to not have them have an interconnection agreement. Now with that, it would mean that these DR tariffs absolutely positively need to be ready to go, you know, when this tariff is kind of approved and put into use. That said, we don't currently have the other individual DR tariffs before us or any of the parties before us. Not saying that it'll change drastically from the language, as you stated, and that we understand that these changes will likely be a copy paste and some minor edits to have the language directly, you know, refer to the various tariffs they're pointing to. But we want to emphasize that although you've made that statement, that we really absolutely positively need these DR program tariffs to really have this type of language in there ready to go, so that we can kind of start off on the right foot and get these going.
Okay, thanks.
I guess really quickly though, maybe asking these two next questions might help spur any additional discussion if it's needed. Namely, are there different revisions needed to these tariffs for hybrid microgrids versus customer microgrids? And the second question is, are embedded edits that are proposed to be put in each individual DR program or tariff sufficiently streamlined to allow for customer microgrids to operate, as there are no interconnection agreements for customer microgrids at this time?
Yeah, I guess just looking at it now, I mean, you know, you might want to just say facility or facilities or generator or generators. I mean, it might be plural. And the only other thing is a generating facility. You know, so and you know, we circled around the question of who is really the party in interest earlier on in connection with the tariff, and it, you know, this is another place where clarification on that point could be relevant. In other words, a lot of these tariffs are the places where the owner or lessee language occur, and we could also clarify that here. That a microgrid could also just be the party who's responsible for the microgrid, whether they own or lease.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, Andrew, this is Jerry. Clarification question. There's a defined term here, customer interconnection tool. Is that defined any place, or is that meant to refer to like the interconnection process? Thanks.
So I believe that was an input made by Hawaiian Electric. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from Hawaiian Electric team, but I believe that is a web tool that Hawaiian Electric has current DER customers go through in order to get to complete their to start their interconnection process. Jerry, what do you propose we do about this particular item? Do you just want it? Do you just want this item to be put in the definitions for each of the DER programs or tariffs, or would you have any other suggestion regarding potentially?
No suggestions. I guess I don't think I've seen that phrase before. That's all. So I wanted to know.
I'm not sure if it's defined, but if you scroll down, it's already referenced in the base tariff in section or the new section G. If that helps.
Oh, so it's something on your online portal, is that it?
Yeah, it's an online portal.
Okay, that's fine. As long as everybody knows what it is.
Sure.
Okay, thank you again for that. Okay, so it appears, does anyone have any other questions regarding this particular section or the slide before we get into closing remarks and next steps? Okay, hearing none and seeing no hands raised either on the screen or in the raise hands feature, which we totally botched. Let's move to next steps and close. But before that, I heard that Commissioner Potter would like to have a few closing remarks or statements before we outline what will happen next.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for their time today and their contributions to this process. This has been an ongoing proceeding for quite some time, and there's a sense of urgency at the Commission to issue a tariff. We want to get this out in the industry and help, promote essentially what we see as a relationship between the utility and these types of microgrid facilities. This has not been established yet in our industry, and we're excited about being, the first out of the gate. But we recognize that this is a tremendous lift, and there's no doubt. I mean, we within our internally with our staff, the commissioners, we've poured hours over the documents and trying to tease out, make sense, and in order to have something that will be successful. And that's ultimately with the big picture in mind. We want this to be successful. We want people to adopt service under these tariffs, under these rules that we're establishing through this proceeding. We want that to be successful, and for them to be successful, to have economic benefits, while the utility maintains financial integrity, indemnification, and is able to continue providing service to the customers within each microgrid in a very reliable and safe way. And ultimately, this fulfills a obligation, and it's to Act 200, where we have been tasked with developing and investigating a microgrid tariff. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is develop something that's successful, that meets the rule of the law. And ultimately, all of you have contributed to that. There's no doubt that we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And this proceeding and this technical conference that we've held today, I've heard a great deal of collaboration and clarity that's come out on some of the areas that we were not clear on internally. And so we're excited to see what can happen when you regroup in your working groups and develop language in the interconnection agreement, as well as in the tariff, and tackling some of those harder elements that we've outlined today. I think that, one of the things that I do want to know is that everyone that's participating in this proceeding is bringing valuable component and perspective. And so we really do, from the CA to MRC to HECO companies, it's really valuable to have your input here. And we really wouldn't be this far without it. And so please stay the course with us. We will get this issued. We will see that this will see the light of day. And in that, and it's important to note that this is not the end. Once we've developed this tariff under these conditions, which we've identified as being emergency conditions and operating within that mode, we do plan on investigating an expanded solution set for these types of facilities that can provide grid services or can operate in island mode in instances such as like Nelha, the campus on Big Island. Those are examples where there's a need already for resiliency, for some energy independence, where they have a high penetration of renewables. And so being able to offer these types of solutions to customers is very important as we continue in our renewable and clean energy transition. So thank you so much for all of your contributions to date. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris, for stepping in and facilitating this conversation today. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much to our PUC staff for all of your hard work. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so let's go to the next steps. Dave, would you like to handle the next steps? Well, I put it on the chair.
Okay, thanks. So, so in terms of next steps, I think what the commission is requesting that the parties reconvene the working group to, in particular, specifically address. Oh, Andrew, I think you're unmuted still.
Oh, sorry.
To specifically address the interconnection agreement for the hybrid microgrids, and just also wanted to add in there that we'd also like everyone to also be thinking about, what further modifications, if any, are needed, beyond the red lines that have been shared already for Rule 24. And I just, the other thing I just want to mention, there were several topics that, as we were discussing the tariff as well, that it sounded like there was an opportunity for further discussion among the working group, and perhaps taking some items back for some of the parties to discuss internally as well. And so I think we would include those topics as well in what we would hope the working group would tackle. And then finally, I think the commission, this conference was really helpful. I know, and so I think there's a lot for the staff and the commissioners, I think, to chew on as well. So I think we'll take that back, and I think the commission will be providing further guidance to all of you, following the technical conference. So we'll stay tuned for that. And I think if once the working group, I know it'll take some time to reconstitute the working group, but please, let Ashley or Andrew on the staff know as you all are making plans to do that, and we will make sure that the staff is able to participate in those discussions as well. Okay, I think that's it for next steps, unless there are any questions or anything on those. Okay, hearing none, then I'll turn it back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Again, thank you everyone for coming to this technical conference. That's all the material we had at this point in time. Again, your input is very valued, and we're very grateful to have everyone as knowledgeable on this call and in this docket process. And we urge everyone to just hang in there. We'll get there. I'm not as good as Jenny to encourage you, but hopefully everyone continues participating as much as they have. Thank you again. See everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.